I pursued Tom for 10 years and helped him settle down with one girlfriend after another. Until this time. I had a conflict with the girl in the bathroom, and Tom rushed in with a group of people. After checking Emily's injuries, Tom stood up with a cold face. Xyla apologized to her. 1. I could hardly believe what I heard. Women's restroom. The place was now occupied by Tom and his brothers. The girls outside were too scared to come in. A group of people looked at me with either mockery or embarrassment. I shook the water off my hands and explained calmly, I didn't push her. There are no cameras in the bathroom, and the girl must have taken advantage of this. Emily smiled bitterly and gently tugged at Tom's sleeve. It was indeed my fault. Xyla, I say it again, I apologize. Tom pulled me over and yelled. In my 25 years of life, my self-esteem has never been trampled on like this. A friend came up embarrassedly. Tom, this is Xyla. You think she's any different? Tom raised his voice and stared at me. Just a dog. All the blood in my body seemed to solidify in an instant. Memories mixed with emotions came flooding back to me. All the uneasy fears I had laid at night finally became reality at this moment and slapped me hard in the face. Several girls were whispering, and some even couldn't help laughing. Those Tom brothers who don't like me are also secretly happy. I stared at the face in front of me, feeling sour. Someone came forward to try to stop the fight, but Tom wouldn't let go. I lowered my eyes, clenched my left hand, and gave him a loud slap in the face. 2. Tom was stunned. There was red in my eyes, I saw it through his eyes. Leaning forward, I whispered, I'm a dog? Are you the dog's pet? 3. Tom and I have been childhood sweethearts and come from similar families. When he was 10 years old, his family fell into poverty and his father was thrown into prison, so he lived in my home ever since. Because I liked him, I followed him everywhere. It can be said that Tom's inferiority complex caused by outsiders taking advantage of his misfortune was cured by my day-to-day dog-licking behavior. Gradually, his silence was no longer humble. His silence turned into aloofness. Many years later, his father was released from prison, and with the help of my dad and other old friends, he returned to the business world and became a big shot. Tom has become the flower on the mountaintop that no one can touch. Tom's mother was in poor health and had lived in a nursing home for many years. The reason he and his mother were able to survive was definitely not because of his father's assets, which had been frozen long ago. So I just said that he was my adopted son and I didn't bully him. Tom's eyes widened and his breathing became heavier. Xyla, isn't that unfair of you to say that? Mark couldn't help but frown and said, You've used your parents' help to coerce Tom for so many years, isn't that enough? Besides, how clean are you? My head shuddered and I looked at Mark sternly. Tom's expression changed rarely and he wanted to speak. I stared at Mark. What do you mean? Mark was nonchalant, sneered, exchanged glances with the people around him, and then several people looked at me with indifference and contempt. What did they know? 4. I stared at the man in front of me. It seems that he knows what I care about and where it hurts, so he deliberately poked there. Emily stepped forward. Tom, forget it. Tom didn't move. Seeing that this group was about to be smuggled away, Mark shouted. Tom, why don't you tell me? I told you Xyla used the favor you showed her when you were little to blackmail you, and then she was abused by someone and you saved her and she kept blaming you. You shouldn't be so shameless, right? With a bang. If just now I was sure that Tom didn't love me, then at this moment I was almost certain that he hated me. The scene from the past flashed before my eyes. I clenched my fists, took a deep breath, but I almost couldn't stand. Waste? Is this how he understands it and how he tells others? There was chaos all around. There was a crack in Tom's expression and he tried to grab me, but I dodged. Bending over, I could hardly breathe. Emily gave me a presumptuous look where he couldn't see her. It seemed that she knew it too. I licked my lips and picked up my handbag. My eyes were red when I passed by Tom. There was nothing I could do. It hurt so much to be bitten by the wolf cub who grew up with me. I looked at him, smiled faintly, deleted all his contact information from my phone, and put the phone in my bag. No apology. Scumbag and bitch will never see each other again. 5. Tom and I have had overlapping circles since childhood, and they continue to do so today. In elementary school, a group of little kids went to an aristocratic school, in middle school they went to a key high school, and after college they gathered in the same industry. Not to mention the friendship between our parents. Just the experience of growing up together is enough to make us feel connected, even if our bones are broken. So even if I deleted Tom, I knew that there was no guarantee that I would not run into him in the future or not receive any message from him. Go home. Slept for 2 days. When he opened his phone, he saw the comforting messages from his bestie, the sarcasm from Tom's friends, and the innuendos from some of his rich second-generation friends on WeChat Moments. And Emily's latest post on WeChat Moments, "I knew you would protect me." Tom's hand held her small white hand, creating a beauty of strength and weakness intertwined. This time I didn't feel anything at all. While driving to work, I bumped into Emily head-on. She was wearing a business suit and had a weak look in her eyes. She was brought to me by the business manager and told to hand over the work to me. I was stunned and flipped through the documents a few times. Who brought it into the company? The business manager was embarrassed. Tom arranged for me to come in, and then asked you to take care of it and familiarize yourself with the business. You will do it. After Tom's father was released, he naturally had business dealings with my father. This company was a joint venture between the two companies. It is not only for the common interests of both families, but also to prepare for my future marriage with Tom. Now, Tom is the general manager and I am the deputy general manager. He blatantly arranged for his girlfriend to come here. Emily lowered her head and said, "I have some difficulties at home, and I am not doing well in my previous company. I am sorry to bother you, Tom. Miss Xyla, where do you think I should start?" There was an innocent light in the little girl's eyes, and her unconcealed excitement was revealed. I put down the document in my hand. I originally said that I would never see Tom again, and I wanted to quit my job, hire an agent, and go on a long journey by myself. Unexpectedly, he slapped me in the face again. "Are you deliberately trying to make people live in unrest?" I walked up to Emily. She retracted her bold look, as if she was afraid that I would slap her. "But I don't even have the heart to deal with disgusting people." I laughed and said, "Start by packing up and leaving. This company will change hands next month. You're fired." After saying that, I walked around her and walked away. Emily reacted after a few seconds, frowned and shouted, "Tom won't agree." I turned around and said, He was just a dog in my family. Who is he? 6. There are a lot of people around. I believe many of them can hear it, and it can also reach Tom's ears. That's good. As soon as I entered the elevator, I felt completely depressed. Even if your love lasts for 10 years and you don't get any response, there is no need to resort to violence. But when I thought about what Tom said to me that day, even though I rationally told myself to remain calm and decent, the sour feeling still surged up rapidly and trembled. Cough. When the elevator stopped at -3, accompanied by a cough from the person behind me, I was surprised that there was someone else here. I looked behind me with wide eyes. A man was leaning on the elevator wall with one arm, holding a cup of coffee between his fingers. He tilted his head and looked at me. "Move aside." I blocked the door. I only realized what was happening when the man walked out. "Charlie, I hired a professional manager. My subordinate. Why should I be afraid of him?" 7. Tom showed up faster than I expected. He ignored my arrangements and asked Emily to sit opposite my office. The next day, she came to my door in person to deliver the documents. "Hurry up, Tom is waiting." Emily smoothed her hair and came back, then spoke to me arrogantly and coldly. I smashed the file in her face. Following Emily's screams and cries and under the gaze of everyone in the office, Tom rushed in. The veins on his forehead were throbbing. "Xyla, I really gave you face. What is your relationship with me? How dare you touch my people?" I was so angry that I laughed, but I didn't want to argue with him in front of so many people about what kind of relationship my behavior over the years and his non-rejection really were. That would be too cheap. I stood up, and before the real conflict began, a figure came over and knocked on the door. Charlie came in after greeting her and handed over a document. He then glanced at Emily and said, "It's not reasonable for Tom to find a subordinate for the vice president without her consent. If there is a big fight among your senior executives, it will inevitably alert the board of directors." He smiled and looked at Tom. "Looking at Vice President Xyla's temper, if you want to place someone, you have to start from the top. Otherwise, it won't just be documents. What if you end up throwing sulfuric acid?" I don't know if it was because his tone was too relaxed, but the people around him couldn't help but smile, and smile lines appeared on their faces, but they tried hard to hold it back. What he meant was that Tom wanted to embarrass me, but he didn't dare to do it in private without my parents' permission. He was a coward. Tom was stunned for a moment and was about to speak. I stared at Charlie's enchanting face and hooked his arm. I don't quite understand this. Come here and explain it to me. As for the rest of you, what are you waiting for? If I don't agree to take someone in, I'll have to worry about their safety if I force them to stay here. As for her, does she want a job or face? Choose one for her, Tom. Emily and Tom were both a little surprised. One of them turned pale with anger. One of them stared at me holding Charlie's hand with a dark expression. Tom left, only to sneer at me before leaving and whispered, "Xyla, are you sure you want to tell your parents?" I sat down and it felt like I'd been shot in the heart. With a bang, blood and flesh flew everywhere. 8. My family did raise Tom, but that was only before Tom's father came out. Before Tom's father went to jail, my family was not as good as Tom's family. After he was released, it took only 6 or 7 years for our family to become prosperous again. It's normal for business to have ups and downs, but my mom said to me one day, "We've been on a downward spiral over the past few years, but luckily we still have your relationship with Tom." Looking at the wrinkles on her face that appeared out of nowhere, the hole in my throat for venting my grievances was instantly closed. Xyla is lucky. After going through that, Tom still doesn't despise you. Child, you should be content. I can't utter a word. The big hole in my heart was filled with wind and blood was flowing out. That matter. How come it became my fault? Besides, Tom knew best what happened. 9. The relationship between Tom and I finally came to a break. That night, there was an industry dinner. Everyone in the circle participates. Even Tom's father rushed there as soon as he got off the plane. I had a headache and was working overtime at the company, so I was late for work. Charlie next to me looked at his watch several times. "It's almost time, don't you want to change clothes?" He has a pair of peach blossom eyes that always give off electric sparks unconsciously. But he is calm and decisive when doing things, always making people switch between illusion and reality. Charlie raised his eyes and glanced at the dress box. "Smoky pink, it will look good." I was upset all night and suddenly I was stunned. My male companion should have been Tom's. But the assistant sent a message a few minutes ago saying that Tom and Emily had already gone in and had met Abram. All my partners are in there, sincere or not, some who are optimistic about Tom and me, some who are waiting for me to get into trouble, are all in there. It's not that I don't have close friends, but most of them are not in this circle. As for parents, people with our background, how many of them can think purely about ourselves? That night, I knew roughly what was going to happen and I had to go again. I vaguely remembered the time when I was 13 years old. My family dinner. Tom was dressed neatly, but he did not sit at the table. He sat next to the swimming pool in my backyard. I found him and called him in. His eyes were cold. No need. Those people only wanted to see me to laugh at me. I went up to him and hugged his arm tightly. I want to see who dares to laugh at my brother Tom. I had been licking him for more than 2 years at that time, and he was always cold and indifferent. I thought he was just shy and embarrassed. That was probably one of the few times I touched him. At that moment, the swimming pool was sparkling, and under the early summer sun, Tom looked down at me in surprise. In his eyes, I saw the unconcealable blush on my face, as well as the shyness and courage that belong only to a girl. Tom went. Later, his attitude remained cold. But the next day when I went to school, I missed the milk and he took it out of his school bag and gave it to me and put an insulated bag in it so it was still warm. Tom put his hand on top of my head and whispered, "Drink it." Maybe it's because he is so seldom nice to me. Over the years, I have always pondered these small details over and over again. Then they were shattered bit by his coldness and ruthlessness until they were completely worn away. I forced myself to stand up and sent Tom one last message. "Tom, are you really going to break up with me?" Tom sent me a voice message. "I just proposed to Emily and we're even now. Stop pestering me." Entangled. Seeing that I was smiling a little sadly, the man next to me tilted his head and looked at me for a long time. After a while, he covered me with a coat and said, "If you are tired, go slowly, Xyla, there is no rush." My name sounds like a double word. And at this moment I didn't want to investigate whether he called me by this double word. I sat down, didn't cry, and just sat there quietly for 5 minutes. Wait until the blood rush subsides and returns to the heart. I finally gave up. 10. I went to the dinner with Charlie's arm in arm. He is very gentlemanly and took good care of me all the way. Although he seemed to be my subordinate, he actually made decisions for me most of the time, and they were always the most appropriate ones. I was indeed a little absent-minded tonight, so I listened to him. Everyone in the audience looked at me with strange eyes, because after Tom proposed, his father Abram covered it up and said with a smile that it was just a kid who lost a bet and it was a big dare. My parents looked embarrassed, but others had to give them face. Mark smiled at me and raised his glass towards me. I also smiled, raised my glass and took a sip of wine. Instead, he was stunned. When we were dancing, the lights were dim, so I simply took off my shoes and dragged the man next to me into the dance floor. But I accidentally bumped into someone. Emily appeared in front of me with a sad face and a sympathetic look. "I'm sorry, Xyla, it's not my intention. I'm also surprised that Tom did this. You shouldn't have told me." I exhaled the smell of alcohol, put my arms around Charlie's neck, and signaled in the direction of Tom's parents with my eyes. "You should put your strength over there." Emily was stunned. "Don't pretend you don't understand. Everyone has their own things to do." I noticed a pair of eyes directed towards me, probably because he saw his girlfriend coming to my place and was afraid that she would be bullied again. A shadow ran towards me with anger and cold eyes. I looked at her and smiled. "As for Tom, I don't want it anymore." "I'll give it to you, sister." The man stopped, stunned. I have been brewing this sentence for many years, but I can't bear to say it. I can't say it, I can't stop saying it, and I can't let it go. But I can give it up eventually, and that day has finally come. 11. I was vomiting in the bathroom and a hand patted my back gently, but not very gently. But he was able to wipe off the dirt for me bit by bit, and wash my fingers that had become stiff and numb. Taking your anger out on your own body is the most irrational thing. A voice came faintly. Then there was a sigh. "But considering that you are really sad, forget it." He smiled faintly. I hate daddy-like teaching the most. At this moment, I felt so sad that I couldn't help but cry. I vaguely saw the screen flashing, and Tom sent a message saying, "Where have you and that man been?" A trace of bitter sarcasm flashed through my mind, and I turned off the phone. I staggered around, and before I lay down on the bed in the hotel, I grabbed his tie and looked at him dazedly. "Just wait, I'll let it go tomorrow." He raised an eyebrow. More and more attractive. "Yeah. So can you let me go now?" His voice was a little hoarse. "I am so sad. I don't know what I did next." The next day, I stared at the messy bed and the person who appeared outside, stunned. Charlie woke up from his sleep, rubbed his brows, looked at me, and came back to his senses. Then he said, "Vice President Xyla, nothing happened. No one else will know about what happened last night. I have to go back this weekend. You can go by yourself, okay?" How did he respond so calmly to my nonsense last night? Took me a while to come back to my senses. "Thank you." Before he left, I said, "Charlie, you know why I hired you. I'll give you a few months to get started. After that, no matter how Elba Corporation is divided, you will be in charge of my portion." He opened the door and squinted at me. "What about you?" I knew he had crossed the line with this question, but somehow I didn't feel offended. I lowered my head and rubbed my wrist to suppress the soreness. There will inevitably be a fight at home, but I can't care. I want those who hurt me to pay the price, so that I can feel better. Because of that incident, I developed some mental illness, but because of Tom, it didn't develop into a serious condition. But recently, I have had some tendencies to hurt myself again. I know my parents don't want to see Tom and I break up, but I can't care about that anymore. Charlie nodded, and as if he had left something behind, he came back to look for it. He took a watch which was so old that he couldn't tell the brand, and he didn't know when it was made, but he wore it like a classic watch. He is not thin, but the lines of his hands and wrists are surprisingly beautiful. With the watch on his face, he looks so beautiful that it always makes people dazed. He stood up, accidentally touched my hand, and paused. "I'll be leaving now. Keep in touch." 12. I was watching the Northern Lights in Northern Europe when I received a call from my mother. "I just realized that you haven't been to the company for a month, Xyla. Tom was distracted and like someone else. What you should do is to fight for it. You let a girl with no status and no position step on your head. You are so useless. The wind was so cold that I was shivering. I gritted my teeth, my eyes burning. It doesn't matter what he does to me? My mother was stunned. What did he do to you? After a pause, he continued. Men need to maintain their reputation. Don't always mention that he lives in our house. I can't breathe. Person was walking towards me, wrapped me in a thick scarf. When you are in a foreign country, it is heartwarming to hear a person with the same accent as you, let alone this kind of intimate and real warmth. I was stunned for a moment, looking at the man in front of me who was wrapped tightly. He wrapped the scarf around me tightly, and then he patted my head. A pair of beautiful eyes appeared from above the mask. It's a good place, Vice President Xyla. Part of your acquisition plan has been completed ahead of schedule. I've applied for annual leave, and I still need your signature. To be honest, at this moment my anger came out from my dantian and was swallowed down my throat. Do you think this is the process for taking leave? Before I could say anything, tears started falling. He was stunned for a moment, then leaned in to block the wind and asked softly, "Are you cold?" My mother asked, "Who is talking?" Charlie glanced at the phone with his beautiful eyes, picked it up and hung up, making a tisk sound. How can you answer work calls on vacation? Can't the Aurora distract you? Women have really weird thoughts. I came back to my senses. Who asked you to follow me? He stared at me for a while and said, "Did you block Tom? You caused a lot of trouble for him at work before you left. He should be looking for you soon." I was stunned for a moment and shook my head. I didn't receive it. I blocked him. eBay is my company. I know his own strengths and weaknesses. Besides, I am about to break up with him to seize control of the company. Why should I care about him? Chairman Sheen, have you blocked me too? He doesn't have WeChat, and he doesn't even know my overseas number. I blurted out. He looked at me for a moment longer and nodded. I paused for a moment and said, "It seems you have done a good job this month." He looked at me strangely and said, "That's all thanks to Vice President Xyla's guidance." I laughed like crazy. All these years, Tom has only maintained a superficial decency. In fact, I was in charge of everything related to him, whether it is life or company. After all, a wolf cub who loses the protection of the wolf pack since childhood is nothing more than an abandoned wild beast. Without the hunter's protection, he would not be able to protect himself. Thinking of this, he laughed so hard that he fell to the ground while sitting on the rock. This is the first time I feel so happy. Charlie pulled me. His eyes slightly curved and he smiled faintly. That night, there was inevitably another drinking party. In the warm wooden house, he sat at the bar, holding a glass of wine in his hand and smiling at me. It was not until I became drunk again that I suddenly heard a voice. "You ran so far alone. Aren't you afraid of something happening?" I thought he was meddling in other people's business, but I realized my heart was beating wildly. Unexpectedly, what this man said came true and something really happened that night. "Teen, Summer called me. What's wrong?" I spoke with a lisp and walked towards my residence alone. "Xyla, you and Tom. Are you really no longer together?" She paused. "He's been looking for you this month, a little crazy." "I was planning to rob eBay," I confessed. "It's normal for him to come after me." Summer choked. "Xyla, it's not like that. Tom came to me and said he was wrong. If any of us can contact you, we must tell you this. He said he was wrong. Can you come back?" My mind suddenly became clear. But it's not because of this sentence. Two big black men appeared in front of me, blocking my way. The wind was howling, and the memories of when I was 17 exploded into my mind like an avalanche, completely overwhelming. At that moment, I was overwhelmed by the trembling, extreme fear, and overwhelming humiliation. In fact, during the years when I was licking Tom, he had said rude things to me. What I cannot forgive is that he twisted the story to tell others in order to put me down. He was supposed to be the God who saved me, but the moment Mark said those words, he was no different from those who humiliated me. It was at that moment that I decided not to look back. 14. The two men came towards me, chatting me up and touching my shoulders. I stepped back trembling and waved their hands away, but I couldn't avoid them. The nightmare came. I closed my eyes and all I saw was my 17-year-old self. I was so scared that I couldn't even scream, as if the nightmare would never end. I was assaulted in my piano class after school. They did everything except the last step and took the photos. Until later. Tom arrived. My hands, which were holding my underwear, were shaking so much that I couldn't even clench my fingers. After Tom fought with them, they fled in panic amidst shouts of, "The police are coming." I will always remember that evening. My heart-wrenching cries. Tom's hand. His comfort and embrace. What happened that day was my deepest fear, and I understood it all. But at this moment, facing the same situation in a foreign country, a thought suddenly exploded into my mind. After my parents arrived, they destroyed all the so-called photos in front of the police. The only people who knew about this were my parents and Tom, and considering my age, my reputation, and my education, the police handled the matter privately. So who spread this news? 15. My collar was grabbed and torn, and I slapped the man but was met with a harder slap. My head was buzzing and my hair was being pulled back. I became more awake amid the severe pain. My chest seemed to be filled with sour cotton. I took out my cell phone. The shortcut key had not changed. One was Tom. I dialed the number. When the call was connected, I heard a panicked voice. "Xyla. Xyla, is that you? Where are you?" After a while, I heard myself asking in Chinese, "Tom, you were the one who spread the news about what happened in the piano room when I was 17, right?" 16. When Charlie arrived, my phone had been smashed. He smashed the fire extinguisher on the two men's heads, punched them desperately, and his eyes were so fierce that it was scary. At this moment, my heart was filled with despair. It's not that I feel sad about why I always encounter such things, but that I finally understand what kind of person I have met. The police rushed over from a distance, and Charlie stopped with a murderous look on his face and raised his hands. "Xyla." He took off his clothes and wrapped me in it, his voice trembling. "I can't move." She barely managed to look up at him during his series of questions, then fainted. I dreamed about what happened after I turned 17. At the beginning, few people knew about this, but my best friend even came to me happily to talk about the music festival. Later on, people gradually started asking me questions. Every time someone asked, Tom would appear beside me, and Xyla would ask those people if they had nothing to do or if their grade ranking had improved. He would also stay by my side firmly and tell those people that nothing had happened, because he was the one who saved the person. Yes, he saved the person. This one thing alone can reverse our roles as protector and protected. He regained the dignity he had lost in just a few months. 17. Charlie is handling the case for me. I stayed in the room alone, not talking and rarely eating. The phone never rang again. Charlie was very worried about me, but he seldom communicated with me. He just arranged my life in an orderly manner. Occasionally, I heard calls from China, asking him how he handled company affairs, and he handled them very well. Occasionally, he wrote numbers on my palm. This is the percentage of shares I collected. How could this person be so considerate? However, when I thought about it at the age of 17, this incident was such a huge blow to me that I still couldn't say a word. All I could think about was what Leslie Chung said. "I haven't done anything bad in my life. Why do you treat me like this? Tom is my lover. Why do you treat me like this?" After becoming an adult, I am no longer so emotional and have become much more restrained and reserved. Tom and I went to the same university and no one knew about our past. He started to be cold to me. Start a relationship. If you don't want to talk about it, just ignore it. The first time I carefully asked him if he could let me handle his girlfriend's affairs if they bothered him, he looked up at me indifferently. Finally, he said, "If you want, go ahead." At that moment, I suddenly had a strange feeling in my heart. I was different to him. No matter how much he likes someone, no matter how much he plays around with people, he can never surpass me. But if he really loved me, how could he treat me like this? I am real. Too stupid. 18. I stayed in the igloo for a week and saw the Aurora for 4 consecutive days. Under the magnificent sight, the knot in my heart slowly began to unravel. Charlie was talking on the phone in the living room, speaking English with a hint of sarcasm. I could tell he was negotiating with someone. I gave him a look and he lowered the price even lower. In the end, the deal was settled at a price that was better than I expected. "Charlie," I called him. Haven't spoken for a few days. My voice was so hoarse that he was stunned. Please accompany me back to China. I picked up the teacup and took a sip of tea, then looked at him, as my boyfriend, 19, until the day we took off to return home. Charlie's face repeatedly showed a confused and sad expression, but he still looked nonchalant and seemingly rude, but he handled things ruthlessly and decisively. I was a little confused. Why can't I receive calls from my parents recently? He turned around and pressed a few buttons on my phone. Oh, blocked. Oh. I looked at him speechless. Charlie, if you don't want to be my boyfriend, you can refuse. He raised an eyebrow. I want to be one I won't refuse. Who are you showing this to? He came over, fastened my seatbelt, and smiled. Xyla, I know your intention in asking me to be your boyfriend is not pure. You just want to see that I can do things for you and that I feel safe when I am by your side, but I don't care. Whatever the reason, I am already your boyfriend. Whether it's acting or a temporary measure, I've been given an identity, so I can't get rid of it. I lowered my eyes. I didn't think too much about it, I just wanted to fall in love, and he could obviously refuse. Charlie looked at me deeply for a long time, hugged me tightly in the turbulence of the plane, and patted my head. Yes, it's okay. 15 to 25 years old. I've never been in love. Never thought of any man except Tom. But now, Tom has been ruled out of this option forever. 20. I don't know how Tom got the news that I returned home, but he came stumbling over in slippers. He pushed his way in among the group of friends, his face looking as if he had been up all night. He was holding a handful of yellow roses, and many of the petals had been rubbed off by passers-by. He didn't have Emily by his side. Tom looked at me and swallowed. He seemed to be afraid to ask me what happened after that day. He asked hoarsely, "You're back?"
Xyla, I'm sorry.
It was all my fault before. Before I could finish my words, Charlie, who had just picked up his luggage, came over to me slowly and leisurely and held my hand. Yo. What about confession? With someone else's girlfriend? You're such a rude person. Tom was dumbfounded. He was handsome and aloof, and you could hardly see this expression on his face. After he came back to his senses, he stared at our clasped hands and asked after a long while, Xyla, you are kidding me, right? I raised my eyebrows. Are we in a relationship where we can joke around? Then I took Charlie's hand and said to the people around me, let me introduce my boyfriend Charlie to everyone. Amidst everyone's shocked and embarrassed expressions, one person faded out of the crowd with a gloomy look. Tom was struck by lightning. Summer came forward to chat with me and took the things in my hands. A few close friends also came forward with a smile. The driver took the luggage. Everyone passed by Tom like a background. He finally reacted and grabbed my sleeve. Listen to me and explain. Xyla. That thing, listen to me and explain. I paused. He turned back expressionlessly. Explain? Explain what? Explain that you and your lover have been showing off their affection for so many years and thus wasting my feelings? Explain that you deliberately let others think that I was really abused? Or explain what? For so many years, even if you can't say that I love you, don't make me feel disgusted by you. I said this calmly, but only he knows how determined I am. People around also heard it. Considering what happened before, everyone was talking about it and exchanging looks of disbelief. I came back not only to tell you that I have a boyfriend, but also because I have done more for eBay than you, so I want it. You can either sell the shares to me or keep the dividends, but I don't want to see you and any of your lovers in the company anymore. Tom? I pulled out the clothes he was holding and wiped them off with disgust. Did you hear me clearly? 21. I thought my parents would object to my taking over the company. Unexpectedly, my mother wouldn't let me in. I ignore it. Knock repeatedly. My mother opened the door and said, Xyla, do you think you did the right thing? Just because of a woman, I heard that Tom has broken up with her. Why are you making a fuss? What did you suffer? Apart from eBay, the Tom family has a lot of wealth. Why do you do this just to save your reputation? My mother was interrupted. Charlie walked up the steps in a windbreaker, raised an eyebrow and held out his hand. Mrs. Sullivan. Charlie. My mother was stunned. My mother suddenly seemed to remember something. You are not Sullivan, my mom called my dad. My dad came over and was shocked. Charlie? He nodded. Uncle Sullivan. Oh. My mind was confused again. So, is there something I don't know? I sat on the sofa in my house and watched Charlie chatting with my dad. My father stood in the garden and introduced him to the world he had planted. The young man listened casually, smiled, drank tea, and agreed. The scenery was very pleasant. Mom, who is he? I don't want to talk too much about Tom with my mom. At most she'll nag me a little, and I don't want her to be as sad as I am. My mother pulled me over and said, Whitman's son. Do you remember Uncle Whitman's ex-wife? The one who was killed while traveling abroad? The child disappeared for many years, and when he came back he was considered the Whitman family's illegitimate child. Later Tangze sent him to study abroad, and he just came back a while ago. Uncle Whitman. Isn't that Mark's father? As for the Whitman family's illegitimate child, I remember that he transferred to our high school at one point. Memories came flooding back. I remember that time I was hanging out with Mark and the others, and no one else could get into our circle at all. One time Mark was in a low mood and said that his father's illegitimate son had transferred to the school, and his father was going to hold a birthday party for the illegitimate son. Everyone agreed to go together and give the illegitimate boy a warning, but after seeing the man's face and temperament, some people backed off. Even so, no one dared to get close to him. Everyone was coaxing Mark, not giving that person any face. I felt really awkward, so I took out a gift box and handed it to him. It's not your fault that you can't decide your birth. Happy birthday. Take it. It was a watch I bought in Switzerland. Tom didn't like that brand, so it has been in my trunk ever since. The man raised his eyebrows, his expression as indifferent as a distant mountain. At that banquet, I don't know how long his gaze stayed on me. Surface? That watch. Charlie finished talking to my father and walked towards me in his home clothes, touching my hair. What's wrong? I stared at his wrist, looking at the leather-worn watchband, feeling mixed emotions. Charlie, I don't remember you, I'm sorry. But I gave you the gift just for the sake of convenience, without much sincerity, and I felt sorry for Mark at the time. And they said you were an illegitimate child. I secretly felt that I was too saintly. If this happened to me, I might not be so magnanimous. So you don't have to. He probably knew that I had remembered it. He smiled, held my hand, and walked towards the dining table. This is my business. Oh, I only agreed to be your boyfriend, but I never confessed my feelings to you, right? Charlie pulled out a chair, his eyes gentle. I do owe you an explanation. I like you, Xyla. 22. My life hasn't changed much since I got together with Charlie. My parents wouldn't really blame me, it's just that they paid more than Abram and his wife. I won't stop you. The previous generation has its own friendship. Tom showed up at the company several times and handed me the equity transfer documents. I coldly told him to talk to Charlie. Xyla. Tom stopped me downstairs of the company, his eyes red, and after a while he said, I know you will never forgive me, but listen to my explanation. At that time, my family was in poverty. Even if you pursued me, everyone around me told me that I was not worthy of being with you. But I really liked you. I didn't see it clearly until you really disappeared, and then I knew I couldn't live without you. I am not a human being after revealing that thing, but after that, I felt that I was of some use to you, and you would trust me, rely on me, and need me. I smiled and pulled my hand away. Wipe it again and again with disinfectant wipes. You're not going to say that you can only be sure of my love for you by hurting me, right? Tom, then you don't just not love me, you're even sacrificing me to fulfill your dignity as a man. Not only are you not worthy of me, you're not even worthy of all the kindness I showed you back then. Tom paled. If Emily and I break up and there's no one around me anymore, and I admit my mistake to you, are you willing to come back? I laughed out of anger. Come back? Of course I will come back. Because I don't intend to let you go just like that. We were chatting intensely when a man rushed up to us. I was pushed in front of the flower bed. Xyla, you are such a bitch. You are still clinging to Tom even though you have been abused by others. He has proposed to me. Why do you want to take him away from me? Emily had probably been looking for Tom for a long time. When she saw us together, she rushed over and started shouting. That's enough. Tom stopped her. Go away, I never loved you. You are just a fake replacing Xyla. Do you think you are worthy of me? Although I am happy to hear dog bites dog cry, I don't intend to forgive either of these two people. Charlie came down at this time. He pulled me up and brushed the dust off me. Xyla looked at the woman on the ground and said, "Call the police." Emily was dragged away in public. Tom followed me like a stray dog, but he was stopped outside by security guards. "Xyla, I have never thought of marrying any woman other than you. They are just the product of my self-esteem. I don't want anything anymore. Can you please not leave me?" A grown man said this to me while crying without any grace. He was my former lover. I was in a trance for a moment, and the man's fingertips pinched my fingers and hurt them. I laughed, wrapped my 5 fingers around his gently and said, "No, because I can't let you bully my current boyfriend." 23. Emily acted like a madman downstairs for a few days and then disappeared. A week later, a live video went viral on the internet in the same city. Emily, in the identity of Tom's only son's fiancée, said in the live broadcast that I was Tom's childhood sweetheart, and because I was violated, I blackmailed Tom morally and ruined their marriage. She released the video of her being proposed to at the dinner party, and in an instant, I became a dirty and bitchy mistress who everyone hated. Tom spoke for me, but was instantly drowned out by public opinion. She's a rich girl, but she's so cheap. She was probably violated because she doesn't respect herself. Is this moral kidnapping? She's already proposed to me, but she's still disappearing to hook up with the groom. Get out of Haichum. Boycott the Elba group. Company affairs cannot be easily shaken by public opinion, but when I read those well-founded comments, even some false accusations from high school classmates, I was so angry that I was shaking. It's time to settle the accounts for what happened many years ago. With a lawsuit, I sued Emily and Tom together for the same reason: slander and defamation. The police records and case records are all there. I was not assaulted at all, but Tom, who spread the incident, and Emily, who led the whole city to cyberbully me, should both be punished. My mother came to pick me up from get off work. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" I just opened my mouth to call out, "Mom," and she hugged me in her arms. She couldn't stop crying. "If I had known Tom would do this to you, how could I bear to force you like that? You are my daughter." I was stunned and hugged her tightly. "I don't want to make you worry. Besides, the family business is my responsibility." As I said this, my eyes turned red. "Xyla, we don't owe Tom's family anything, but if he bullies my daughter again, I will kill him." My mother cried and shook, and started talking without thinking. Charlie walked out of the company, followed by several policemen. I asked him what he had done and he looked indifferent. "You forgot to accuse one person. I will fill in the chain of evidence for you." "Who?" My heart was pounding as I muttered. "What do you mean? You said I forgot to sue someone. Who was it?" "Mark." In the rearview mirror, the man's eyes were cold and murderous, and he said softly, "I accidentally overheard his conversation with Tom. That incident back then was planned by him." I was freezing cold. Mark and Tom have always been good friends. Tom must have told him about his troubles with me, and many people have also said that he didn't deserve my kindness. Plus, I showed my affection to the Whitman family's illegitimate child. Maybe it's not surprising that Mark hates me, but when I think about the years I have been entangled with them, it turns out that my love, my cautiousness, and my compromise were all built on the bullying and trampling of these people. I cannot accept. Charlie held my hand and said, "Don't worry, I won't let any of them go." Good. Charlie returned to the Whitman family and took back his own identity. Of course, my contribution was also indispensable. At this time, Mark was deeply trapped in the negative news in his youth and the castration of his family. I also learned the real reason behind the incident. It's funny, it's just because I didn't bully Charlie who just came home like they did. As for whether Tom knew that it was Mark who planned all these things, it is not so important now. 24. I received a call from Emily one afternoon. "Xyla, come out. I have something to show you." I frowned. "No time, haven't you been taken away by the police yet?" Emily smiled. "Aren't you curious about what Tom said about you in front of me? Let me show you what you got out of your 10 years of sincerity. Don't you want to know? Do you really not want to know whether he knows what Mark did to you?" The sun is shining outside the window. It's impossible to say that I don't care. The most painful part of my heart was stabbed again. I put down the documents and decided to make a break for it. The address is by the sea. I drove there. I sent a message before leaving. To Charlie. Xyla looked at Emily standing there in a white dress looking so weak. She smiled. Here you are? You know, when I was with Tom, I felt that he really hated the type of people like you who were superior to others, so he liked me. Later I realized that he couldn't find a sense of security and existence in you. So he sought it from a small person like me. She laughed until tears came out. She must have truly loved Tom. I am indeed humble, born in a poor family, and I almost got married to a rich man, but you ruined it all. Emily laughed strangely. But it's not that easy to get me to leave. He is reluctant to spend money to get me, so I will make his whole family suffer. Anyway, it's not like we haven't suffered before. What have you done? She laughed sharply. Is it possible for a business criminal to change after serving 10 years in prison? Such an ungrateful bastard should pay the price. I took a few steps back, trying to get back to the car. Tom really didn't know what Mark had done. After he found out, they had a big fight and broke up. So what? He lost you forever, Emily said. I was pregnant and died unexpectedly, and he didn't even look at me for the last time, so you are all guilty. A car suddenly rushed out from the quiet parking lot opposite, coming straight at me. I dodged, but Emily grabbed me and pushed me hard. At the critical moment, someone pushed Emily away, hugged me tightly in his arms, and jumped to the side, avoiding the car. The car hit the railing on the beach with a loud bang. At the same time, sirens sounded from far away. The sound of my huge heartbeat made me ignore the burning scratches on the back of my hands and look up at the man who was hugging me tightly. He was frowning, as if he was dissatisfied, but also as if he had lost something and then found it again. He lowered his head and kissed me fiercely and asked in a hoarse voice, "You knew to tell me before making a decision. Does this mean that you have begun to love me?" Xyla. I was shaking all over, and I couldn't tell whether I was scared or relieved. I just suddenly kissed him back passionately, letting my tears melt away in the kiss. We were young, passionate, and determined at that time. But in the end, I was let down by time and fell in love with the wrong person. In the distance, I saw Tom coming late, and he turned and left without saying a word. Later, I learned that Emily was not as kind as she looked. Before entering eBay, she was arranged by Tom to work for Chin's family, but she was kicked out after only a few days. But she was very smart, and in just a few days, she had some evidence against Chin's family. She failed to blackmail Abram and reported Chin under her real name after breaking up with Tom. Tom could only watch his father being taken away by the police once again. 15 years, all just a dream. 25. When the doorbell of my apartment rang, I was holding the cat that Charlie gave me and wiping its but which had not yet learned to poop. After washing my hands, I opened the door. Tom, with his unshaven beard and no manners at all, stared at me for a while and asked, "I'm homeless again, Xyla, can you take me in again?" "Baby, who?" A faint magnetic voice came from my kitchen, and then before anyone else came, I heard the sound of frying. The kitten couldn't find me, so it ran to my feet and played with my slippers with its little feet. How I wish that the person who once lived with me in the mundane world was you. But I was already at a loss at that time. I stared at him for a while and closed the door. Garbage collector, no one. Picking up the little kitten, I finally made up my mind not to look back and walk towards my true happiness.